Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
The energy of the human spirit and of the soul bubbles up from below. That's the only way that we're going to get different results in technology. It's not going to come from just switching out the people at the very top. It's going to come from making sure that, we can all share in the maintenance and the expansion of flourishing lives together without having to wait for someone virtuous and all powerful at the top to hand it down. So that's about all that I have to say on this front at this point. And frankly, it's time that people just start listening.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. It's great to be back with you all as usual. I am joined this week by managing editor Seth Barron and editor James Poulos, the Gang of Three. And we've got a fair few things to talk about, starting today with bank closures. The highest profile one that I've noticed in the news lately is Nigel Farage. Those who follow international politics or even just the special relationship will remember Farage as the UKIP leader, kind of Brexiteer in chief, often portrayed as the far-right gremlin of Europe's worst nightmares. Sort of faded a little bit into the background lately, in at least my own estimation, but back in the news as he accuses NatWest's private bank. This is one of the big banking chains in the UK, and they have a private bank that's spelled Coutts. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce that. It's probably Coates or Cots. But they cut him off, or they sought to cut him off from his funds. And Farage is alleging that this was done on political grounds. The watchdog authority, Financial Conduct Authority, is stepping in to take a look. But Farage says he's got a 40-page document after filing a subject access request with the bank. Now, the reason that I bring this up, that we should talk about this, is because it's eerily reminiscent of a number of other high-profile and not-so-high-profile stories that have swum across our ken. You might recall the Canadian trucker protest back in 2022, long ago in the bygone days, when Canadian truckers tried to make headway against COVID restrictions in a demonstration in Ottawa. The government, the Trudeau government, froze their bank accounts in a move that had never been performed before, eventually gradually unfroze most of them, indeed perhaps all of them so far as I know. But this was a shocking kind of betrayal of public trust under the 1988 Emergencies Act. Then rewinding the clock yet still further, approaching the late Cretaceous period here, 2019, JP Morgan was the subject of scrutiny when they froze a few accounts, or closed a few accounts, actually. One of them from belonging to Laura Loomer. The others, Martina Marcota, Joe Biggs, and Enrique Tarrio. That's the Proud Boys guy. So I don't know, like a bit of a trend, definitely some bank closures that are obviously politically motivated and use as weapons of state. We might even throw in there the US's sort of dalliance with Russia in the wake of the Ukraine invasion, although that's a slightly different case. And then we might add, could be a coincidence, who's to say, this uptick in suspicious activity reports that's going on just in private accounts, just normal folks trying to get their money out and discovering that they can't, that their account's closed or it's temporarily on hold. And the sort of official explanation for this that you'll find in, say, the New York Times is that fraudulent activity is on the rise since the pandemic, an opportunity for people to try shifty business, and that banks not wishing to pay regulatory fines are acting out of an abundance of caution to cut off people's access to their cash. They don't have to, and often refuse to give a reason for this. These suspicious activity reports get dumped at the doorstep of law enforcement, which then uses a kind of computer program to sift through them and decide which ones to follow up. I don't know. Could be nothing. Maybe fine. All seems a little fishy, and definitely if you're, a person on the January 6th watch list and you came to try to get your funds out and you suddenly realize that like your money just isn't really within your reach anymore, you might feel a bit concerned about the financial state of things and the state of the republic. James, I'm going to kick to you because you're sort of our like global Britain and or global finance guy. And my question for you is, dude, what the
well, to coin a phrase, yeah. I mean,
Right.
we saw this coming. It came again. Like, people need to understand that this is not going to stop, that this is a mode of governance, that it is a part of a large arrangement that has interoperable parts reaching across finance and into education and into quote unquote speech. And it's not going to stop unless people start taking a step in a slightly uncomfortable direction and putting some technology to work for them. If you're unwilling to figure that out, if you're unwilling to take a chance, if you're unwilling to roll up your sleeves, get your hands a little bit dirty, guess what? You are signing all of that technology over to people who want to control you and terraform you and rearrange you out of your hard-earned and long-fought habits and customs and mores, and reassemble you into something else, something that we've never seen before, something that looks a lot more like China than it does like America, but is sort of the worst of both worlds, the worst of what China is doing and the worst of what we're doing, two terrible tastes that go really poorly together. I get it. A lot of people want to grill. A lot of people like, well, if we just get the right, president, and it's not enough. It's never going to be enough. I'm getting tired of just sort of like railing about it, and it's difficult to see how to move enough people in the right direction quickly enough. My best guess is you got to go to a relative handful of top policy and politics people in the most important states in the country and just lay it out for them and help them to understand, because that does offer the ability to move pretty quickly on stuff, whether it's through legislatures, whether it's amendments to the state constitutions. It's got to happen at that level, and it's got to be broad and encompassing enough, like the First Amendment, like the Second Amendment, that it's not just a virtuous government picking winners and losers. I mean, that's not really America, and it's not enough to ensure that the energy of the human spirit and of the soul bubbles up from below. That's the only way that we're going to get different results in technology. It's not going to come from just switching out the people at the very top. It's going to come from making sure that we can all share in the maintenance and the expansion of flourishing lives together, without having to wait for someone virtuous and all powerful at the top to hand it down. So that's about all that I have to say on this front at this point. And frankly, it's time that people just start listening.
But James, are you talking about? I mean, I appreciate the call to action, but like, what is it? What kind of legislation would you have? Like the states, say the Texas or Florida, like what would you have them do? Say like pass laws that state chartered banks can't close down people's accounts for no good reason, or provide more transparency?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's when you're nibbling around at the edge of things like that, then suddenly you're having to get lawmakers to sit around and go, well, what counts as a good reason? And then you're just getting sucked back into the same kind of debate club that has been so incapable of stopping this freight train. look, we're going to have to bite the bullet on this stuff and say, look, Americans need to be able to have unfettered access to and use of fundamental digital technologies. Oh, but that's scary. They're like weapons. Yes, all technology it's dual use at this point. You slap a TV screen on top of your smartphone and you can fly a swarm of drones and kill people and blow stuff up. Like, yes, this is the world that we've created. And so what are we going to do about it? We're going to get over our fear of letting people get their hands on the scary technologies. Because if you don't let Americans use it, then they're going to become even more alienated from their technology. They're going to become even more worshipful of their technology. They're going to be reduced to trying to imitate their technology in the hopes of having some relevance. This is a large republic. And if you want a large republic, it's got to be a commercial republic. And if you want a commercial republic in a digital age, you have to have customary characteristic and general use of these foundational technologies. I'm talking about basic protocols like Bitcoin. I'm talking about high-powered GPUs. You look at what the bad guys are doing around the country. They're saying, oh, no, nobody needs a computer that powerful. Oh, no, nobody needs to be mining that much Bitcoin. Oh, this stuff is bad for the environment. It uses up so much energy. Oh, no, this is, they could hack something. And it's like, okay, well, what do we have right now? And what we have is what you see. You have our regime doing its level best to ensure that ordinary Americans cannot access or use the basic building blocks of digital technology. And so that, that's not an American way of doing things. That's, whether it's with handguns or rifles or electricity or you name it. When we come up with a weapon or a technology, it more or less gets treated in accordance with the Constitution. And ordinary people have access to it and they use it and they develop it. And yes, some people break laws and yes, some people get killed, but like, welcome to a free society. And if you take those things off the table now, you're going to have a regime, as long as digital technology is around, that is not America and it doesn't work like America and that doesn't produce and reproduce Americans. It'll reproduce people with a much different culture, much different sense of who they are, of what life is all about. Everything that we're going through right now, all this debating over, oh, what do we do? All that's going to be, distant in the rearview mirror and shortly thereafter altogether forgotten.
I know nothing about this. Are there laws preventing people from owning like really powerful computers?
Yeah, you look at California, and of course, when California does something, all these other states sort of chase after it to try to be like California. And then it becomes the model for national legislation. They've done this with guns. They've done it with some other stuff. That's the way they like to do it because California is a one-party state. And it's a big one at that. And, it happens to be the one where still to this day, like this is the epicenter of tech over here, the tech industry. California has absolutely said, we're putting restrictions on the commercial sale of high-powered GPUs. Whether it's, we can't have people using this to mine for Bitcoin. We can't have these people using these for gaming. All of these, these could be used to do dangerous things. And it's like, well, yes, people, a free people will have the ability to do dangerous things. But here in the People's Republic of California, no, we don't want that. We only want the 1% of the 1% to be able to do dangerous things.
Yeah, the thing that gives the game away for me on this stuff, for me, an idiot about technology, is it's like, okay, who needs computers that powerful? Nobody needs computers that powerful except us, right? Except the US government. And when this sort of closure stuff is happening at the same time as we're just coincidentally hearing all about how, it would be a really good idea, like a central bank digital currency. It would be great if like we could just consolidate, like the whole Bitcoin thing, very messy, a lot of people, a lot of different coins, kind of confusing. We ought to just kind of put it all under one roof. And my feeling about that in the context of like under a government, under a regime that is defining concerned PTA moms as domestic terrorists is like in a pig's eye. So I am way less kind of up on and advanced in the high weeds of it than James, but it does seem like an obvious starting point for any American response to this technology is like not that. The opposite of the government gets all the control. The federal government aggregates to itself all the computing power, all the servers, whatever. And we just kind of make laws that keep the whole thing in place. I mean, in some way, maybe I'm like, the defunct member of the founding generation, like arguing against, I'm like Andrew Jackson or whatever, like taking up his sword against federal bank and so forth. At the same time, the way that power is wielded now is very, very different from several hundreds of years ago. And we have a ruling class in place that has shown itself totally willing to just unperson people that it doesn't like. So I guess my like asterisk or caveat or uncertainty or whatever here is, it does still seem to me like there is an enormous hurdle here for people in terms of just like understanding what the heck is going on. And I know that, the resources are out there, but they're also highly technical. And people, we're talking here about like, nice suburban moms and, gun wielding farmers. And like, these are our people that we want to kind of take ownership over themselves and their lives. I feel like there's a certain sense of demoralization that sets in. And maybe the only answer to that is just like, to continue cheerleading and to hashtag raise awareness. But it's an uphill battle, I guess, is all I'm saying about that.
Yeah, it's a very uphill battle. But when is it ever not? That's the good news is it's always been hard. It's always sucked. Like, look around, I mean, just because many millions of people aren't being like killed in war doesn't mean that it's not a really horrible war, one that's taking place in the spirit primarily, but also in economic and cultural and spiritual life, But on the flip side, like it could be a lot worse. And it has been a lot worse. I think what's so demoralizing is nobody feels like that anything that they do has an effect. And that's something that I'm seeing everywhere from like the neighborhood level all the way up to like Washington, D.C. There is a real sensation that it's just not possible to coordinate people in a way that creates concrete results. I would suggest that one reason why that's happening is because people spend all this time on the internet and spend all this time with their devices. And yet what materializes out of all this disincarnate activity? The answer is not much, not a whole lot. Oh, well, that's good. We just fight the war through technology. And it's like, well, okay, but like, how much have wars of words really settled things? I think people kind of got it into their head over the course of the 20th century that like, well, radio is really powerful and propaganda is really powerful. And, like if we can perfect the city in speech, then we can go out into the world and perfect the city in real life. And, if you just read the right books, then you'll know what to do. And if you just listen to the right smart people or the experts or the gurus, like then you'll know what to do. And that's proving to be not as true as it would need to be in order for the situation to change. And the reaction to this is, a lot of people like, well, second look at conspiracy theories. And those can range all the way from like, oh, there's this particular kind of bad person in charge and we need to identify that particular kind, all the way to like, what, nothing's real, space is fake, the earth is flat. And, I don't know. I mean, would it really change my life that much if it turned out that space was fake and the world and the earth is flat? Not really. But that's not, that's not going to help either. It's not going to help either if the pyramids were built by, some, I don't know, Freemasons who are still walk the earth and are trying to synthesize human blood. I mean, look, like identifying the problem is not enough. And there's this fantasy that if we just unmask the villain, then we'll be able to wage the true holy war. And I think that in part, like actually the villain was unmasked a long time ago and that's already been settled. But beyond that, it's like, getting the identities right, getting the names right is not going to unlock some kind of incredible power that allows you to triumph. You got to like get out there and you got to do the work with the people face to face. You can't simulate that stuff. And for all of the obsession with simulation that's coming out of the AI boom, there are some things that you just can't simulate. And I think we're probably learning the hard way right now what some of those are.
Okay, space is fake, but that's a conversation for another day. The only bits and bobs that I will add to this is, right, the results are in. The keystroke is not mightier than the sword, nor is the mean tweet. But what is sort of mightier than the sword, or at least mighty enough to cause a whole lot of stir, is like the Moms for Liberty. I mean, that's what we were talking about last week. The fact that this kind of group of PTA moms is, getting pilloried as the next Hitler Youth, shows you that there's like a real sort of anxiety about local organization and self-governance and freedom of association and all that stuff, parental rights especially, among the good and the great. And on the subject of conspiracy theories, like, it is worth noting, I feel, that whenever something like this happens, it always seems as if there's like a pre-approved, whenever, for instance, bank closures tick up, all ready to go, there's like a pre-approved New York Times piece about how there's nothing to see here and a perfectly rational explanation. And to me, at least, that is kind of the most suspicious thing. And it does not incline me necessarily to believe in like QAnon or whatever, but it certainly makes me sympathize with and understand why somebody might feel, gosh, there sure are a lot of unseen forces manipulating major structural changes that will have a direct and important and generally deleterious effect in my life. And all of this, once again, sort of reinvigorates my sense of the urgency of face-to-face, neighbor-to-neighbor, person-to-person organization and interaction and infrastructure. I'm going to leave it at that for now on this topic and turn to Israel. The Israeli president, Chaim Herzog, visited Congress. He made a speech to the joint meeting of Congress and was met with protest. Pramila Jayapal, a Democrat from Washington, called the country a racist state. The squad, including the usual suspects, Rashida Tlaib and so forth, refused to attend in protest. This provoked a response from the Republicans, who led a resolution reaffirming support for Israel, the House's support for Israel, it should be said. And like a lot of people voted for it. On the other hand, of course, the squad always generates enormous attention and buzz. They always take a maximalist position. And this is one, I mean, the sort of Israel as an apartheid state is one that has always occupied a certain place on the radical left. Certainly in Britain's extreme left, it has recently made some headway, I would argue, and it certainly the radical left generally is making headway in America. Seth, I kicked to James last time, so this time I'm gonna punt to you. What did you make of this whole episode, and do you think that the squad is, as they say, on the right side of history here?
Well, they certainly think they are. I'm not sure history really has sides in that way, but
what?
I know, right?
Yeah.
What I thought was very interesting about this latest episode, Pramila Jayapal, she was it was some kind of meeting of, progressives. And what's curious about it is that the person speaking before her was Jan Turkowski, who's like a lefty Chicago congresswoman, Jewish. And it was during Jan Turkowski speaking that these Palestinian pro-Palestine activists, anti-Israel activists, started interrupting the speech. And that's when Jayapal stood up and said, no, you don't understand. Jan's one of the good ones. Basically, is what she said. She said, like, look, we all on the stage agree that Israel is a racist state, but there's people who are not on the stage who are working very hard against that idea. I guess meaning like, I don't know, the Schumers of the world or the Jerry Nadlers of the world, who ostensibly are, progressives, like Jerry Nadler's in the Progressive Caucus that Jayapal runs, but they're not willing to come out and proclaim the perfidy of Israel. But here's what's interesting about this whole debate. And I think the apartheid language is key, because apartheid is a very specific, refers to a specific regime that was run in South Africa, that South Africa itself called, like the racist government of South Africa called what they had apartheid, like a system of separation. But you got to remember, South Africa was, Apartheid was a system where a minority imposed racial separation on a majority. South Africa was what, like 15% white? Israel is apartheid defines Israel in so few ways that it's like this incredible abuse of language. It's not a minority imposing itself on a majority. Both sides have equal rights. There is no separation within Israel, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I think most people are familiar with this. But here's the key thing, and this is what's so interesting to my mind. Apartheid, the leftist uses apartheid to describe America too. In New York City, they talk about apartheid schools, schools that are more than 85% non-white. When you listen to the way the left talks about policing in America, they talk about it in terms of they're always comparing it to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces.
Cased in America, and right, yeah, go on.
Yes, so like for instance, they talk about in Ferguson, in Louisville, they're very into this idea that all of these police departments are using the Israeli model of subjugation of a native population. This is key to the BLM perspective, leftist perspective, squad perspective. And basically, here's the point, and this is why non-Jews who are conservatives, but maybe aren't that interested in Israel, here's what you have to understand. The left doesn't hate Israel because it's a Jewish nation. They hate it because it's a white nation. This is the point. They don't like Israel because they see it as whites colonizing a non-white country. And they essentially see all white countries as existing like this, whether or not there was a native population to settle or not. So basically, their vision of the world, the future, is that all the white countries, are essentially either apartheid states or, will be apartheid states once the demographic balance shifts. I mean, how many years is it going to be before they really start talking about how when the white population of America is no longer a majority? I mean, at that point, it'll become an apartheid state because the whites will have a disproportionate amount of power and they won't be a majority. Maybe this sounds like some crazy stuff, but I think that's what's going on. And remember, the problem for the Democrats, and this is the future of the Democrat Party. I mean, this Palestine stuff is not going away. And the way in which it's allied to the BLM model isn't going away either. But the problem is that something like 50% of donations to the Democrat Party come from Jewish donors. They don't like to publicize that. They don't like to talk about it or be reminded of it, but they're in a tough spot. So anyway, that's kind of my take on it.
That's really interesting. So essentially, any nation that is majority white by kind of origins, historically majority white, is by definition an apartheid state, since all nations involve holding some territory, and the right claim to territory always belongs with the non-white minority, or indeed the quote-unquote indigenous population. We just saw this whole thing about like America is on stolen land, Ben and Jerry's being asked to give up its headquarters and stores because of all the native tribes that ought to occupy this space. And it definitely seems to me, I mean, we've touched upon this before, that the whole progressive cause, at least racially, the whole narrative about America, the 1619 narrative, the woke narrative, whatever you want to call it, depends on sort of centralizing slavery as the defining evil in American history, but also as the defining fact of American history and America, and almost emblematic of all white action everywhere, all European action, all Anglo action, whatever. It all comes down to and is perfectly encapsulated in the horrific evil of chattel slavery. And out of that kind of nuclear core, they then derive all of these other so-called oppressions by analogizing them to Black slavery. So it's like women are now kind of under the heel of the patriarchy. Gay people and transgender people are in this fight for our lives against the evil, oppressive, whatever. I mean, it's all sort of harkening back to the civil rights movement as like a model. And in order to do a civil rights movement in a justifiable way, you have to be able to claim that there's the same kind of like new Jim Crow that's now still bearing down upon all these other aggrieved groups. And so there's this kind of like obsession that develops around the, obviously true fact of the moral evil of slavery, that has to be the worst and most unmentionable, unthinkable thing in the world. Black people have to have ownership over the oppression hierarchy. No one can have ever been more oppressed than Black people. And of course, who is the greatest threat to this narrative? What national or ethnic history most threatens this idea? It's the Jews, right? It's Jewish people who have been through nothing but a litany of oppression, exclusion, marginalization, and abuse in and out of Europe, and before there was ever a Europe, and when it was like Assyria and Babylon. And so that sort of uncomfortable fact is kind of, it seems like, what this whole thing exists to wish away. Like Israel has to be placed on the like white apartheid state side. It's urgent that happen so that it can't be a kind of wholly separate and distinct thing. Like they can't allow there to exist a people that don't follow the pattern of kind of civil rights logic at all, but have their own rich and distinctive history of oppression, suffering, overcoming, all that stuff. I mean, it's kind of psychotic, but it also makes a certain degree of sense that this would become the central fixation going forward of the woke left.
Well, also the woke left and the BLM left are incredibly myopic. They just have no sense of anything outside of the immediate past and their own fictive histories, the 1619 narrative, and the effort to apply this model to the rest of the world quickly fails. Right. The argument a few months ago about how Cleopatra was Black. And I saw some Egyptian scholar guy on television saying, look, I mean, I understand that Black Americans have felt erased and all of that, but there were plenty of African kingdoms for them to talk about if they want to have Black kings and queens, but Egypt just isn't one of them. Just deal with it. Why are they imposing their model of rewriting history onto Egypt, which already has history and it's well attested and everybody understands who Cleopatra actually was. And there are images, contemporaneous images of Blacks, and they weren't the kings and they weren't the pharaohs. So this is a major problem. I mean, I was just thinking today, how many countries in the world have oppressed minorities? I mean,
100% of them, right? I mean, all countries, every country.
Look at Tanzania. Okay, Tanzania used to be two countries: Tanganyika, which I guess was a German colony, and then Zanzibar, which is an English protectorate. And then they joined up together just for the hell of it. I'm like, there must be still some tensions there. Well, sure enough, the Zanzibarians, who are primarily the Arabs, and they have there is a separatist movement there. Okay, maybe it's a fringe thing, but you could probably find a bunch of them who could present a compelling case for why Zanzibar must be free. I mean, do this everywhere. Another thing is people like to say Israel is a brand new country. It didn't exist until there's wine that's older than Israel. Well, look at Montenegro. Look at Vanuatu. Look at half the countries in the world are just social. I mean, they're all social constructs. So
Yeah, if we're going to be anti-colonialist about it, like what about all these just random sort of like pizza slice countries in the Middle East that were just invented by the British? Like surely that too should be those national powers should also be dissolved. I
yeah,
mean, this speaks to my kind of bizarre reaction and response to living in the South, which is tailor made to piss absolutely everybody off. So buckle your seatbelts. But I was out in Franklin here in Tennessee, just, nearby to Nashville, this lovely colonial, well, not colonial, sorry, it was a Civil War era town, 18th, 19th century houses and just a really kind of picturesque Southern town. And there's a Confederate monument. There's, one of these infamous statues to the Southern forces. And I was watching people, now it's, you see people of every race there, and it's very modern America. And they'll go picnic on the lawn outside this monument. And I was reflecting on this whole thing and the complexity of, well, we, hate the people tearing these statues down, but how do we feel about the statues or whatever? And it suddenly occurred to me like, wow, I'm living in a country that had a war against a portion of its population. Like the regime that won fought this little mini nation called the South, which arguably has like a distinct ethnic profile. And won, right? However you feel about that. Like if you are a, great lost cause enthusiast, or if you're like a full-on Lincolnian, whatever, like, the North won and therefore conquered this like, you know, nation within a nation and proceeded to do something kind of unheard of in the history of nations having civil wars, which was to fully reinstate this supposed like miniature nation inside a nation as Americans, right? Just to incorporate that history of the South into us and not to do the oppressed minority thing. And so it's like, I'm a, Northerner through and through in my bones and veins, but it's actually kind of an amazing and difficult and complicated thing where we're already trying to incorporate this like subculture, one among innumerable subcultures, back into the polity. And this is, kind of to me, a characteristically Western capital W thing to be doing. Of course, it's incredibly painful. Of course, it's messy and involves all sorts of recrimination and wounds that are being healed. But this was Lincoln's whole thing, right? We must patch up these wounds. Like, let us not be enemies, but friends. And yeah, you think about like what nation ever in the history of the world would like think up to even do this. And I'm sorry, but the Israel-Palestine thing, like mutatis mutandis, kind of reminds me of some of this. It's like, where else in the Middle East can you even think to make the accusation that you're not free enough, that you're being quote unquote oppressed? Like try complaining that you're oppressed in Iran, like see how far it gets you. Anyway, I'm ranting now, but this all is like it just struck me that we're so used to this that we don't even realize the extent to which like it's no guarantee that you will be able to like survive in this egalitarian pluralist society with like a mini subculture that actually did a rebellion and then gets to, come back together in peace and harmony. And yeah, the thing about like, every country ever always has like oppressed minorities, it's like except us, like we thought not to, so like let's not do that, like let's not just decide to now become now become like all the other nations. Give us a king.
Yeah, if I could just speak to one final thing. So the Republicans put forward a resolution saying, oh, we support Israel, like you mentioned this. Ayanna Pressley, one of the members of the squad, she tweeted out that like she just thinks it's shameful that the whole Congress is up in arms about how a woman of color, speaking of Jayapal, a woman of color chose to speak truth to power. Now, okay, about, racism. Now, this whole truth to power thing is so annoying anyway, but the idea that the head of a major congressional delegation caucus is like being cast as weak, powerless, and just, so low that when she, you know, calls Israel a racist state, it's speaking truth. This whole truth to power thing, I'm sorry, it's got to go. It's too annoying, especially when it's like you're talking about like super powerful people.
Right.
I mean, I don't think she's like really, she's not really the one.
Yeah, no one ever realizes that they're the power. It's like, oh, I don't like this truth very much. Right. Well, that's why you're the one trying to like shut down people's mean tweets. Okay. In the brief time that remains to us, this will be a bit of a lightning round, but we just wanted to kind of dip our toes into this whole conversation about DEI and the military. There's I'm reading now from the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Mission on the Army Diversity website. The Army is a global leader in embracing all people of our nation and the unique contributions of those individuals in an inclusive environment while creating a war-winning capability. I'm reminded of the old statement. I forget who it was who said, we make Marines and we win wars. And somebody on Twitter, Robot, one of my favorite suit accounts, pointed out, like, notice that we make Marines comes first. In other words, that this institution has a kind of ethos of like shaping a certain kind of person, and that out of this kind of person comes the victory. And if the victory is not coming out of that kind of person, well, then why are you fighting the war or winning the victory at all? It's a victory for a certain kind of nation with a certain kind of character that honors certain kinds of people. We all know what DEI is at this point. We've like heard about it all the time. We've run a bunch of pieces on the site at AmericanMind.org about, General Mark Milley's investigations into white rage and this kind of long-standing language of, or now like well-developed language of prioritizing diversity and inclusion over all else. It just struck me, and it's been in the news lately, that this DEI statement is almost an exact parallel for we make Marines and we win wars, right? We embrace all people of our nation and the unique contributions of those individuals in an inclusive environment while creating a war-winning capability. Is it paranoid of me to be like, that's basically amounts to saying, since DEI means we prioritize like everybody except for straight white males, this is the sort of ideology that our nation now exists to spread across the world and defend by force?
Well, it's something like that. I mean, it does seem kind of weird that this is now. I mean, I get the feeling that the rest of the world sort of is increasingly seeing America as exporting the pride flag or exporting, whatever demented kind of, however it is that we can sell more munitions or waste munitions in order to transfer more money over to the Defense Department. And then, I mean, like, for instance, like the money, we keep saying we're giving $100 billion to Ukraine, but if I'm not mistaken, we're not really giving Ukraine anything, right? We're just transferring arms there and then spending the money at home on arms manufacturers. I mean, it does definitely seem as though this is not whatever DEI initiatives that military is taking. It's not working because recruitment is so far down. But they seem to be doubling down. Like,
maybe that means it is working. Like, is that just too cynical? I mean,
maybe it is working. Like,
that's the
idea.
point, Like,
well, it says here, some 41% of the military identify as members of minority groups, and that number will grow larger. The military must be able to attract, train, and retain them for the services to retain competitive edges. Now, I don't know if the minority groups who are joining the military are doing it because of DEI initiatives, but I certainly think it's probably driving a lot of people away.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah, this stuff is so repulsive to people.
Maybe it is intentional, just to create this like extremely weak military. I don't know. I mean, why are they putting Rachel Levine in an pretending like she's an admiral. I mean,
Right.
I understand, yes, in the public health corps, okay, she has like some kind of rank, but they're treating her as though she really is like a flag admiral, like, defending the Pacific Ocean or whatever.
Well, yeah, this is what the regime has left. They've managed to just like totally degrade the physical and mental health of the people. Nobody has any savings. Like the people are exhausted. America is on break, and like something's got to give. So how do just looking at this problem that the regime has created for itself, like what are your options? Like what are your tools of statecraft? And the answer is like, well, convince this kind of like very, degraded biomass that your military technology allows them to create a fantasy land where they are like beautiful and amazing and empowered and healthy and free and unified. And that's not what China's offering, and that's not what Russia's offering, and that's not what India's offering, and that's not what Israel's offering, and that's not what Europe is offering. That's America. America is like a virtualized sort of funhouse version of that Emma Lazarus poem that wound up on the Statue of Liberty. Doesn't matter how like dysgenic or traumatized or self-loathing or uneducated or whatever. It doesn't matter. You come here, step into the magic box. The magic box is going to take care of you. Once you go into the magic box, you can control our most powerful weapons, and you can, represent millions of people, and you can like make laws, and you can punish bad guys. And it's, all you have to do is just like strap yourself in to this machine that gives us all these great powers, and we're stronger together, and our feelings are superpowers. And this is the tool that is left in the toolbox for the regime. And so look, I appreciate it when a super smart person on the internet stands up and goes, you know what, like this wokeness, this is just wrong. And they proceed to like explain how they're so smart that they know that wokeness is wrong. And like, okay, yes, I get it, but I already got it, and you don't really need to be that smart to know it. And at the end of the day, if you write 100 books about exactly why wokeness is so wrong, what have you done really in this world? The bigger issue, the fundamental issue here is that American elites have, I think maybe intentionally in some ways and not in other ways, kind of painted themselves into this corner where this is what they have to go off of. This is the last sales pitch that they really think that they have available. Some of them are true believers. No, really, like it really is true. You just strap yourself up to the machine, and it doesn't matter if you're kind of like this hideous, like last man, you can become first again, and it's going to be so great. But I think a lot of people kind of just, they realize that this is all sort of pathetic, and their hope is to just, prevent the US from kind of just melting down. I mean, I think of someone like, Barack Obama. He was like, oh, what's happening on the internet is the greatest danger to democracy that has ever existed. And on the one hand, you're like, that is like a criminally insane thing to say. And then on the other hand, you're like, well, okay, but to a degree, like, yes, we have seen Americans just fragment and fragment and fragment and fragment down into these like increasingly bizarre identity subgroups. And it is a bit of a vicious cycle, and it's becoming harder and harder for like ordinary people to like encounter each other and deal with each other. I forgot which Democrat it is, like maybe Chris Murphy, one of these guys, who was like, I am, I'm putting together a bill in Congress, and we have a loneliness epidemic in America. And so we need like a national, anti-loneliness initiative, and we need laws so that we can, legislate morality, legislate togetherness. you can see where this is headed, and it is headed in a very, very bad direction, but it's also understandable. It's understandable. They've created these problems. They're trying to solve them. There's really nowhere to turn to for some other, it's not as if you can go, oh, well, at least the British Empire exists to kind of maintain the world order, or, well, after all, if only we were all really like China. I mean, it's wish casting. It doesn't, we can't just imitate the other leading brand and imitate our way out of this mess. So it's all, it's all very sad. And it's all very bad, but it's also pretty understandable. And the real, crisis this, crisis that, everything's a crisis. One day I'm going to wake up and there's not going to be something presented to me as a crisis, and that'll be a nice day if it comes. But what is sitting atop all of this stuff is the United States became the global hegemon, or the sole superpower, or the hyperpower, whatever you want to call it. And like, what did we do about that? What did we do with all that power and all that authority? And the answer is like so painful to confront and to contemplate. It didn't save us, and I think a lot of people kind of believed that it would, or hoped that it would, or just kind of got caught up in it and missed a lot of things. And now, well, guess what? Like, you dominate the earth militarily, and your enemies and your adversaries, and even some of your friends, are going to try to increase their power and their influence through, less public means than confronting you on the battlefield or whatever. And it's been decades of like foreign influence operations, corruption, international crime, money laundering, spying, like all these kinds of shenanigans that we just, the American people don't have eyes on this stuff. Their representatives often don't have eyes on this stuff. Their thought leaders, no one, and especially on the right, because the right's been on the outs with all this stuff. Trump got a tiny peek under the curtain, and they brought the house down on him. That whole underground world is thriving, and it is difficult for people to accept that, like, the U.S. has been getting defeated in a major way across, on all of these fronts. And I'm sure there are some patriotic Americans left in the intelligence community and the FBI and the, Department of Justice and so on and so forth. And, the task, it comes down to them sometimes to sift through this insanity and say, like, well, okay, are there any of these international criminals that we can bust today? Is there anyone who's trying to like set up undue influence within our zillions now of intelligence agencies? I mean, DHS, like, these things are monstrosities. And if you manage to kind of get a grip on that, which is a huge task in and of itself, if you manage to scrape this exhausted and deeply unwell people together into some kind of, like, well, sure, they're waving all these other weird flags, but at the end of the day, at least they think of themselves as Americans and aren't going to be susceptible to wishing that they were Chinese or whatever. That's not the end of the story. There's still this massive rebuild project that's needed, and I don't think wokeness or the Borg or anything else is gonna be able to pull it off. And so, if you're serious about rescuing America or whatever, you got to look past all this stuff, and you got to say, okay, so the bad guys lose somehow, and the debates are had and won somehow, and finally it's sort of like, okay, well, we tried all these dumb things and they didn't work, so now what do we do? And there's just still a very big question mark there. We're not going to be able to go back to the way things were, and there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about what there is to do constructively, other than just fighting the bad guys, trying to beat the bad guys, losing today and scraping yourself together for tomorrow. The fight is not going to work, and the fight is not going to be won unless there is a compelling and commanding vision or understanding of what a rebuilt America needs to look like. And there isn't even a consensus on that on the right. So yeah, the internet, all these technologies, they really have fragmented us and accelerated the fragmentation in a way that does make it hard to see what America ought to look like, how it's going to work when we come out of the tunnel. That's going to be tough, and when people are more concerned about which presidential candidate is getting owned the hardest on Twitter or whatever, it just makes that goal all the farther away. So definitely, this isn't a call for people to turn their nose up at politics or the national debates or whatever. I mean, those things aren't going to go away, and they reflect reality to a degree. But if there's no one sort of in the mix who is working out these deeper challenges, then even if we do sort of end up standing tall in the rubble, we're not going to know quite what to do afterward.
Well, here's how you can try to figure out what to do afterward or right now. That is by going to read the damn site. You like that transition? How's that for a segue? But we actually do think that part of the reason that we run this site, AmericanMind.org, is to help provide some resources, some cutting edge thought that goes beyond what you're usually getting served up, something that's going to help you actually navigate in real time and space the challenges that James and all of us have just been describing. To that end, we like to pick a piece every week that we particularly thought struck us or is worth highlighting to send you to it. Mine this week is called ChatGPT Isn't Woke. It's in quotation marks. Woke is in quotation marks. It's by John Clark Levin. This is part of our ongoing AI feature. I love this piece. I love it so much. Let me try to explain why. It's something of a minority report. John Clark is not, as it were, on our side, quote unquote. He's not hostile to conservatives. He's certainly sympathetic to our rather beleaguered sense that the major institutions of power are dead set against us. But he sets out in this piece to ask as dispassionately as possible, what does it mean that these large language models, these elaborate systems of equations, which John Clark describes in great detail with much kind of engaging charm, what does it mean that they're churning out these results that list leftward? He does some of his own interrogation of ChatGPT. He then refers to other people who have kind of performed a few test experiments, like saying to ChatGPT, okay, you can only say support or not support to the following viewpoints. What does that get you? And the picture that emerges is much more complex and much more interesting than what John Clark describes as the purple-haired Maoist, the purple-head gender-fluid software engineers at big tech typing away on #resistance decal laptops, coding pure communism into the model. He does describe and consider a way in which that could happen, but concludes that's not actually what's going on, and that instead what's being revealed by these hyper-advanced and hyper-powered statistical prediction models, basically these programs that test out different ways of predicting the next word in a given sentence, is that they are uncovering, at least partially for us, certain rhetorical trends, different ways that the extreme right and the extreme left use language. He's careful to specify that this doesn't kind of evoke, or even never could possibly evoke, any sort of value judgment or conclusion about what this means in the hearts of right-wingers and left-wingers, because, of course, these machines don't make those sorts of value judgments. They spit out certain results that we don't always know where they're coming from, and we have to kind of devote human effort to interpreting them. But when we do, interesting things emerge. So this is just a really sensible and smart kind of approach to this question, which obviously vexes all of us here. Are these machines kind of dead set against us because of who builds them and who runs them? It's also, in a funny sort of roundabout way, like an interesting use case for large language models as thermometers for the kind of mid-level temperature of various corners of the internet. Just a really smart and interesting piece. ChatGPT isn't, quote, woke, by John Clark Levin at AmericanMind.org. Seth, what do you got?
Yes, I did enjoy that piece quite a bit. A piece that I really liked was Czar Wars, and it's in reference to the new plan of the Biden administration to appoint a book czar, someone who will, from a federal office in D.C., I guess, look over library acquisition choices across the country in public schools and I suppose libraries, and also, but it goes beyond just the question of which book is where, and is it really a ban if you choose just not to assign it. And it's written by a friend of ours, Jonathan Podlosny, and he looks into the Biden administration's efforts to actually rewrite Title IX to make it that books, like efforts to say, keep really pornographic type sex manuals out of libraries are in fact an attack on the civil rights of the students, to the point where basically parent groups could be charged with civil rights violations for questioning, even just creating an atmosphere of discomfort, could be, violating the civil rights of their own children. So, it's another of these woke federal power grabs, and it's a really interesting piece. Czar Wars by Jonathan Podlosny.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a really good one. And James, what do you got?
I strongly endorse both of those selections. I am going to go with the Gay Frogs Election
for the title alone.
Raw Egg Nationalist. The subhead says it all. The question of our poisoned environment is moving into the political mainstream. Now, this is definitely not the time or the place to get into an extended discussion about the relative merits of raw egg nationalist versus Bronze Age pervert. But I will say this. Yes, bodybuilding, great, go for it. I lift. I don't like missing gym day. Amen to all that. However, still more important than that is not poisoning yourself with the everyday food items and containers, and this is. It's difficult to take a look at what has become of the American people and to not wonder whether perhaps our lived environment is physically destroying us slowly, or maybe not so slowly. And this is what Raw Egg Nationalist is writing about. Alex Jones talked about the gay frogs and so forth. I don't know where he got his information, but this stuff is not just for the cranks anymore. RFK Jr. is talking about that stuff, and some people would say he too is a crank. But come on, you get the evidence is mounting, the studies are beginning to show, and the circumstantial evidence is there too. We just really can't, if our environment is so degraded and the things that we're doing to our bodies and our brains are so degraded that we slip into a kind of subhuman condition, a really just biologically compromised condition, then any attempt at counteracting that is also probably going to be artificial and disfiguring in its own way. So I'm worried about that. And unlike some of these giant regime level questions, which sometimes take centuries of blood to unfold one way or the other, this is something where, people, regardless of kind of where they come down on the great political spectrum of life, people can recognize this, take some constructive steps, apply some pressure, make some choices, begin at home, begin in their own lives, and get somewhere that seems to me to be, an importantly better place to get to. So the Gay Frogs Election, Raw Egg Nationalist.
I'm sitting here with my beef organ supplements on my desk and my slabs of fresh meat downstairs in the fridge that I bought from a local farm. And all of this is music to my ears. Whatever's making you gay, don't let it be the seed oils. That's what I have to say. Okay. Thanks, gents. As always, this was a really fun one. And thanks all of you for listening. If you want to learn more about what we do, you can go to AmericanMind.org, obviously, but you can also go to ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, Claremont.org, and our new DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. I called it new reflexively, but it's actually been around for a bit, doing all sorts of great work, including, but not limited to, provocations aimed at considering how our public policy could be radically shifted in a more virtuous direction. A little database showing where those donations that got poured into BLM have really gone, and much, much more at dc.claremont.org. If you want to donate to support our work, you can visit claremont.org/donate. Always appreciate that. It's great to receive your support in whatever amount you deem appropriate. That's what keeps the lights on around here. Thanks to our production crew, Jake Gannon, Logan Zeppieri, and Blaze Ebener. If you're listening to my voice and you haven't already subscribed to our show, do that now and leave us 5 stars if you would, just to let us know you appreciate it and to help spread the word about the show. At the very least, if you have criticisms, we will thank you kindly to keep them to yourself. Thanks one more time to all of you for listening. We will talk to you next week.